You're listening to the Tony Kinnett Cast on 93 WYPC.
WCYTV
Here on the Daily Signal.
Good evening and welcome to the Tony Kinnett Cast, live breaking. The United States has struck Iran. I repeat, the United States has moved ahead with the Donald Trump administration plan to strike in Iran. This is a Truth Social post from the president at 7:46 p.m. Eastern Time, Saturday, June 21st, 2025. Quote, "We have completed our very successful attack on the 3 nuclear sites in Iran, including Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. All planes are now outside of Iranian airspace. A full payload of bombs," and then President Trump put bombs in capital letters, "was dropped on the primary site, Fordow. All planes are safely on their way home. Congratulations to our great American warriors. There is not another military in the world that could have done this. Now is the time for peace." President Trump put "now is the time for peace" in all capital letters. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Now, what we know at this point in time, it appears that the kind of flagged operation outlet news statements this morning about B-2s heading to Guam, refueling in Hawaii, may or may not actually be the planes that were there. That may have been some type of a diversion to suggest that Trump was going to take longer in the entirety of the 2-week period that he set forward. To remind those in the audience who may not have been following this story as closely, a couple of days ago, President Trump came before the country and said that he planned to give Iran somewhere in the next 2 weeks, time for him to make his decision as to whether or not the United States was going to strike. Israel had come forward yesterday evening, and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu intimated that Israel did not need the U.S. bunker buster bombs, which would be needed for an airstrike on Fordow to take out Fordow, the primary nuclear site that was encased in reinforced concrete at least 150 feet below, in some parts of that area much deeper. Now, deeper under a lot of rubble and rock. So again, for those who are just now coming in to the live stream, the statement from the President of the United States, Donald Trump, at 7:46 p.m. Eastern, quote, "We have completed our very successful attack on 3 nuclear sites in Iran, including Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. All planes are now outside of Iranian airspace. A full payload of bombs was dropped on the primary site, Fordow. All planes are safely on their way home. Congratulations to our great American warriors. There is not another military in the world that could have done this. Now is the time for peace. Thank you for your attention to this matter." Now, from this point forward, here is what we know. U.S. officials have confirmed to Reuters that the B-2A Spirit long-range stealth bombers participated in tonight's strikes by the United States against the nuclear facilities in Iran. And open source intelligence, as long as 2 separate media crews who are currently feeding me information, are confirming what I had, to be completely honest with you, had kind of assumed, suggested at the beginning. The B-2s heading to Guam this morning were, in fact, the perfect distraction for an actual strike operation against Iran. So we do not have any idea yet what particularly were used in the military operations as the bombs that President Trump is talking about. He does seem to refer to these particular bunker buster bombs as likely the type of munition that was dropped on Fordow. Again, that's the GBU 57 series MOP. That's the Massive Ordnance Penetrator. It's a 30,000 pound, or if you're one of the countries that didn't land on the moon, 13,600 kilograms. It is a bunker buster bomb developed for the United States Air Force. We're the only country in the world with this kind of technology that can penetrate a whole heck of a lot of reinforced concrete with one of these. Now, again, we don't have confirmation right now that a GBU 57, the bunker buster, is what was dropped on Fordo. But given that Trump has listed 3 bombing sites in Iran that were struck by U.S. Air Force bombers, and only describing bombs as what struck at Fordo, very likely this is in fact the strike that President Trump was intimating. To give you a bit of perspective on the timeline here, President Trump originally gave Iran 60 days to decide whether or not they wanted to negotiate with the United States. Trump then dispatched Steve Witkoff, his main negotiation man, to the Middle East to have several different negotiation meetings with the Iranian regime. And the Steve Witkoff team gave the Iranian regime a lot of really, really, really nice outs. Essentially said, here you go. You can have some enrichment, but you have to allow United Nations and United States inspectors to all nuclear sites so that we can confirm that you are, in fact, not enriching beyond certain percentage levels of uranium and plutonium. And the Iranian regime said no. And so Steve Witkoff made it a little bit nicer, so much so that many on the right in the United States criticized what was going to be another Obama-style deal to Iran on enrichment. But Witkoff said, okay, well, maybe you just allow United Nations inspectors and a slightly higher uranium enrichment level. And Iran said no, which made the UN almost do the home improvement, huh? Because that's a very wild thing. The United Nations has always been rather friendly toward the Iranian nuclear pursuit. And intelligence came in and was confirmed by the United States and several European sources, many of whom are, if not friendly towards Iran, we can at least say apathetic towards picking a side, suggesting that Iran was gunning it, going all in on the last lap towards some type of nuclear bomb or at least fissile material that would be able to be attached in a dirty nuke-style situation to some kind of a ballistic missile, some kind of a drone, stuffed inside a shipping container, what have you. Driven through a Christmas market in Germany, as are the groups that Iran funds, for example. So the Israelis, again, we do not have any kind of confirmation yet whether or not the Israeli Defense Force, the Israeli Air Force, waited for White House confirmation and green light. There's still a lot of mixed signals around that on the diplomatic side as to whether the Israelis, when they struck at the end of last week, whether or not they had actually moved forward with U.S. full green light approval or whether they had done so kind of their own accord. But the Israelis, while saying they would like the United States to participate, Netanyahu made it clear that this operation could be done without the United States. And Trump, while being pushed all week, we do actually have some of those clips, all week Donald Trump was pushed as to whether or not he was going to strike the Iranians or whether he was not going to strike the Iranians. But Trump said that he was pursuing an end. He wasn't pursuing a ceasefire, he was pursuing an end.
What specifically is better than a ceasefire? What are you looking for here?
An end, a real end, not a ceasefire, an end.
So something that would be permanent?
Yeah, or giving up entirely. That's okay too.
Are you closer? Is that possible in the next 24
Why not?
hours?
Certainly possible. Complete give up. That's possible, yeah.
So the president of the United States also made it clear that he really wasn't going to be pushed back and forth on whether or not he was going to do this. And he was criticized by those on the left and the right, really just those online who have been driven insane by this particular action over the last couple of weeks, that the president would not say whether or not he was going to strike Iran. And a lot of people accused him, by the way, of grandstanding, of suggesting that, well, he's just really enjoying the attention right now. That's why he's keeping everyone kind of on tenterhooks here. And that just doesn't appear to be the case. It looks as though, given the high amount of leaks from the White House over the last couple of months, really over the last couple of years, in the White House, there have been individuals sending things over to Axios, to CNN, to the Washington Post, perhaps on the conservative side to the Tucker Carlson network. There are a series of leaks in the White House that are giving away military and diplomatic decisions long before the United States has acted on those. And so going into this Israeli-Iranian situation, the president of the United States and the White House had a significant choice ahead of them. And I made this prediction early on that given the amount of leaks that were, again, in front of everyone, that were heading over to the Washington Post, to the New York Times, to the Wall Street Journal, that the Trump administration was likely going to, if they couldn't root out the mole, something like this, obviously a very difficult kind of thing to root out the moles for, then perhaps they might instead move forward with submitting a bunch of fake stories. Basically, they would submit one thing to one part of the State Department, one thing to one part of the Department of Defense, one thing to one part of the Department of Justice, one thing to one part of perhaps interns at the White House. And they would send all of these stories. And then you would see something pop up in the Wall Street Journal or in Reuters or the New York Times, and it would say, Donald Trump announces he's doing this. And then Trump would get up in front of the country and he would mock those for spreading a fake report around.
Facilities. Where's your mindset on that?
I can't say that, right? You don't seriously think I'm going to answer that question? Will you strike the Iranian nuclear component? And what time exactly, sir? Sir, would you strike it? Would you please inform us so we can be there and watch?
So the President of the United States, as well as his entire cabinet, has very serious interest in not having this information leak out to the broader public. Duh. And then starts sending out what appear to be very spurious news stories that, oh, Trump's not going to strike. Now he is going to strike. Now Trump's open to negotiation. Now he's not open to negotiation. He comes out and he slaps the Wall Street Journal. He comes out and slaps the New York Times. He makes it very clear, despite kind of counter narratives running around regarding whether or not Iran's pushing a nuclear weapon, that he's been very consistent for the last 20 to 30 years on his messaging. Iran, from the Trump perspective, cannot have a nuclear weapon. And so then what followed was, from the kind of isolationist side of the aisle, a lot of warnings that this was going to be Iraq and Afghanistan, and then a lot of warnings from the interventionist side that it needed to move quickly and that he might be tacoing or chickening out, that Trump always chickens out criticism that's the left has tried very hard to force into a meme. And that is what went into the weekend. And so through Carolyn Leavitt, the White House press secretary, President Trump communicated directly, within the next 2 weeks, I will make my decision as to whether or not I will strike Iran. And in this entire time, he's saying very openly, hey, if Iran wants to, in some way, form, or another, come to the negotiating table, then they need to. Because they're losing. They're losing very, very, very badly. Again, the President of the United States made this perfectly clear.
You've been making progress towards a peace deal, but I don't know if you know this, but Lindsey Graham and Mike Pompeo were there on the ground in Ukraine.
Wrong Trump clip. Sorry. They all look the same when you're breaking the story live here. Here we go.
Mr. President, the Iranian foreign minister this afternoon said if the U.S. is serious about negotiations, that you would call up Israel and request that they stop their airstrikes. Will you make that request?
Well, I think it's very hard to make that request right now. If somebody's winning, it's a little bit harder to do than if somebody's losing. But we're ready, willing, and able, and we've been speaking to Iran, and we'll see what happens.
So the big linchpin, and look, I'm trying to give as much straight news as updates as they come right now. I'm trying to keep my analysis and my commentary to an absolute bare bones minimum. I will mention that on June 20th, that would be yesterday, at 4:30 p.m. Eastern, Adam Credo over from the Washington Free Beacon, he's their senior writer, he made basically a summation capped off with a news update where he said, just in, Iran rejects U.S. diplomacy, says zero enrichment of uranium is off the table. And then Trump says he won't press Israel to stop their current strikes. So essentially, the Trump administration says zero enrichment is the rule. That is what you need to come to the table. And Iran says, no, we're going to enrich no matter what. Trump says that's non-negotiable. Try again. Israel strikes them some more. Iran, Trump says, you're going to come to the table? And essentially, the Ayatollah said no. Not coming to the table. No enrichment is off the table, not doing so. And also, we're not going to even engage in a conversation about a ceasefire until Israel is ceasing the bombs dropping on military sites in Iran. Which Trump said, well, I mean, it's kind of hard to call off a group that's winning the war, which is, again, one of the things that Trump has described in his negotiations with Vladimir Putin and Volodymyr Zelensky. So when we move forward in this particular instance, with that framework in mind, the Trump administration greenlighting the United States Air Force to target specific sites in Iran is not and should not be surprising to anyone. It lines up with the Trump administration's aims and goals. It lines up with the facts on the ground. And it lines up with the media strategy from the Trump administration, essentially trying to keep those who might leak this to the press and give the Iranians or give someone who is rather unfriendly to the United States time to act in advance, to essentially scuttle that so that the operation can be carried out effectively. Marco Rubio, as well as Secretary Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, have worked very hard to ensure that as many non-military individuals in the Middle East have been evacuated with safe distance. There's heightened security, obviously, on U.S. military installations around the region. Now, as well, I should point out, this just came down from President Trump, New Truth Social post here, quote, "I will be giving an address to the nation at 10 o'clock p.m. Eastern at the White House regarding our very successful military operation in Iran. This is an historic moment for the United States of America, Israel, and the world. Iran must now agree to end this war. Thank you." I am receiving a couple of sources which are suggesting that Iran is, going to move forward and retaliate immediately. I am not seeing any evidence right now that an official communique from Iran has come down. When that is in front of me, and I can confirm with high confidence that it is a real communique from Iran, which is a little difficult at the moment, considering that the Israelis and perhaps alternative actors have essentially created an internet and a TV blackout in the region. I can't really confirm something that we don't know if it has been sent out or not just yet. So again, from the President of the United States at just after 7:46 p.m. Eastern Time, the President of the United States has confirmed, quote, "We have completed our very successful attack on 3 nuclear sites in Iran, including Fordo, Natanz, and Esfahan. All planes are now outside of Iranian airspace. A full payload of bombs," and then he has bombs in all capital letters, "was dropped on the primary site, Fordo. All planes are safely on their way home. Congratulations to our great American warriors. There is not another military in the world that could have done this. Now is the time for peace." He puts "now is the time for peace" in all capital letters. "Thank you for your attention to this matter." There are a few other updates that we now have coming down. Jonathan Schanzer, the executive director over at the Foundation for the Defense of Democracies, has essentially started posting a couple of pictures of what he claims is Fordo, and it's just an absolute firestorm. Can't really confirm whether or not in this particular instance those pictures are real. So we're not showing them here on air just yet. Right now, the social media is just a firestorm. We have individuals chiming in from all over the world, essentially trying to claim various versions of what's currently going on at Fordo and at Natanz. Not a lot of word currently on Esfahan. According to open source intelligence groups, 3 senior Iranian officials told the New York Times that they believed American forces had bombed Fordo and Natanz at around 2:30 a.m. in Iran. That was at 8:23 p.m., so just 4 minutes ago. The New York Times has not listed the 3 senior Iranian officials, but in this particular strike, in this particular series of actions, there haven't been a lot of media outlets actually reporting direct military officials. Most articles right now, unless they come directly from the office of the President of the United States, the office of the Secretary of Defense, the office of the Prime Minister of Israel, or directly from the Ayatollah's Twitter account, there have been no statements in any media articles that are coming from named individuals. None. They all come from some form of anonymous, this intelligence source, this defense source, this ministry source, this senior official. I'm heaping a lot of doubt on that simply because if the news outlet is not capable enough to name their sources, then again, I can't confirm. Now, of course, it's very likely that Iran is in fact trying to communicate that the United States has bombed at least 2 of the sites. President Trump, of course, saying that there are 3 sites which have been struck. No reason to doubt that as being accurate at this time. The president is still planning to address the nation at 10 p.m. at the White House regarding, quote, our very successful military operation in Iran. He calls it a historic moment for the United States of America, Israel, and the world. Iran must now agree to end this war. Thank you, end quote. Again, over here on the Tony Kinnett Cast with the Daily Signal, another radio station signing on. For those that are just now joining us over on the live stream side of things, President Trump has announced that the United States has completed what he calls a very successful attack on the 3 nuclear sites in Iran, including Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. Now, he says that all of the planes are currently outside of Iranian airspace. He has described a payload of bombs dropped on the primary site, Fordow. He does not specify what kind of bombs were dropped on the Fordow site. If this strike is anything like the strike on Soleimani in Iran in his first administration, he will likely be very descriptive in his press conference just an hour and a half away. The bunker buster, the GBU-57 series massive ordnance penetrator bunker buster bombs, are likely the type of munitions that would be dropped on Fordow if, again, the goal is penetrating the reinforced concrete and the structures that are at least 100 feet beneath the surface of the earth. Again, exact estimates vary. Now, if you're wondering what's going on right now in the political scene, I want you to imagine 2 kinds of senators and representatives, and with very little exception, Republican senators and representatives are praising the actions of the president. And so far, Democrat representatives and senators are very critical, again, with a couple of exceptions. I know, I'm desperately shocked and surprised by that as well. According to the Associated Press, thank you, producer Daniel, for this update. The Associated Press says, quote, the International Atomic Energy Agency has confirmed that Iran is producing highly enriched uranium at Fordow, raising the possibility that nuclear material could be released into the area if the GBU-57 A or B were used to hit the facility. So if the enriched uranium was enriched to a high enough percentage, then you could see some scattered radioactive material. It's unlikely, given the type of munitions that were used, that, for example, the GBU-57, it doesn't kick up a massive like mushroom cloud. It's not a carpet bomb kind of situation where it strikes either just above the surface or on surface. It's designed to penetrate and then throw force downwards to penetrate the bunker, hence the bunker buster. So it's unlikely that you would see some kind of cataclysmic explosion that would toss huge amounts of radioactive or fissile material into the air. But if, in fact, that were the case, I know that the IAEA has confirmed that it's a possibility that nuclear material could be released into the area. It's just unlikely given the type of munitions, unless that afterward, if afterward, you were going to see some type of additional munitions thrown on top of the site just to finish it off, per se, that could theoretically kick up dust that contained enriched uranium and radioactive material. We just do not know yet. The New York Times has officially stated that the United States has entered Israel's war in Iran. So that's the New York Times. Again, for those who are just joining us, President Trump has stated about 15 minutes before 8 p.m. Eastern Time, we have completed our very successful attack on the 3 nuclear sites in Iran, including Fordow, Natanz, and Esfahan. All planes are now outside of Iranian airspace. A full payload of bombs was dropped on the primary site, Fordow. All planes are safely on their way home. Congratulations to our great American warriors. There is not another military in the world that could have done this. Now is the time for peace. Thank you for your attention to this matter. Now, a couple of things here that are important to point out. Number one, Hugh Hewitt, who is a former conservative columnist over at the Washington Post and is arguably one of the best columnists currently writing, has pointed out the Trump doctrine, 60 days does in fact mean 60 days. When the Trump administration gave Iran 60 days to wrap up negotiations, and instead they took to flipping off Steve Witkoff, who was doing all but washing their feet every time he went to Iran, that was a bad mistake. to flip off the Trump administration as though Donald Trump were Joe Biden and he would do nothing and there would be no problems and, the Americans would just apologize for Hiroshima like certain members of the administration have previously done, like previous administrations have previously done. That is not, in fact, a way to read President Trump. And after the Israeli strikes were taken in a way that put U.S. soldiers at little to no risk of loss of life, only participating in defensive operations, only participating in the evacuation of non-combatant staff, non-military and auxiliary staff in the region, diplomatic crews, etc., that right now the United States, after Israel has maintained an extremely prominent level of air superiority over Iran, so much so, in fact, that they are flying sorties in open, broad daylight, that they were refueling over Syria, that Syria and Iraq and Saudi Arabia and Russia and Pakistan and India and Turkey, that all of these random conglomerate problems for the United States, or at least so we were told, were going to come in and fight on the side of Iran, and they were going to give the United States a lot of trouble. The BRICS Economic Alliance, for example, none of them showed up. None of them. We have evidence right now that China has flown in two of these. Yes, we have word right now that two Chinese aircraft days before this strike flew in perhaps some kind of medical supplies or small equipment supplies to Iran, given that they were Chinese flights that were heading to Iran through Turkmenistan and then disappeared off radar. But at least according to open intelligence sources that we have access to, and a couple of friends of yours truly on the ground, perhaps certain contracting groups were responsible for turning away one Chinese aircraft, and there really hasn't been much seen since. So if all Iran has gotten is two small pseudo-commercial flights from China before China issued an order to evacuate all Chinese citizens from Iran and Israel, Russia's saying essentially that they're unhappy, but they're not going to do anything. Syria's saying no. Hezbollah saying no. The Saudis issuing a small condemnation at the beginning of the strikes and then assisting in the shooting down of Iranian projectiles. And other associative nations around the Middle East not doing anything. Iran does, in fact, at this point in time, stand alone. There's no evidence to suggest right now, given how Iran has been firing its ballistic missiles. The first night of retaliation, they fired over 300 ballistic missiles. The second night, they fired 100. Since then, they have been firing, I guess, sorties, if you want to call them sorties of ballistic missiles. Sorties of 15 to 40 ballistic missiles at a time. Again, and I say at a time because we're not quite sure what you would classify this. It's not like an artillery barrage. You don't just light the howitzer. You don't just, pull the lever. The howitzers fire all in like a standard range of time. Ballistic missile launches, they have to be brought hot. They have to be launched. You don't just slap another rocket out there and let her fly. It isn't quite done that way. As well, the Israeli Air Force has done a pretty impressive job of striking a lot of these ballistic missile sites before they were able to fire, if not a first round, especially not a second round for many of these primary sites. So the Iranian ability to wage a large ballistic missile operation has been severely wounded. Additionally, we have reports of some kinds of civil unrest in Iran. We don't have confirmation because, shocker, regimes do tend to quell or quiet down certain kinds of civil unrest. Chairman Mike Rogers, the chair of the House Armed Services Committee, released a statement, quote, "The president made the correct decision to strike Iran's nuclear sites. Iran made the choice to continue its pursuit of a nuclear weapon and would only be stopped by force. It would be a grave mistake to retaliate against our forces." Now, again, there are statements which are from very, very unconfirmed sources saying that Iran is vowing to strike back. We don't have any official statements like that yet. Nothing on record. And as soon as any of those statements are in a point of high confidence, we'll make sure to get those to you. But I'm not going to speculate, Ayatollah Khamenei says it. We have no idea. At this point, we have no idea if Ayatollah Khamenei is currently alive. We don't. He might be, he might not be. Right now, the Israelis have made it clear that they no longer see a reason for Ayatollah Khamenei to be waking up every morning to Sugar Baby Ray. So I'm not entirely sure how long this man is long for this world. That's one for those who speculate and do that kind of commentary and analysis to do. What I will say, the one kind of commentary and analysis that I will provide on this that I think absolutely needs to be reiterated, and given that my editor-in-chief has advised me not to make a lot of analysis and commentary, I'm aware that the ice I'm treading on is very thin, but I think that this is not one that requires an excessive amount of speculation and fortune-telling. The Trump administration, in an effort to combat the number one plague of U.S. foreign policy over the last decade, these leaks 72 hours, 48 hours in advance of military or diplomatic actions that state the U.S. hardline, that state the U.S. expectations, the number of resources, the individuals involved, that these kind of leaks that are sent to the Associated Press, to the New York Times, to the Washington Post, to the Wall Street Journal, perhaps to the Tucker Carlson network, that these kind of leaks ahead of time that state what's going on in the White House, in the Department of Defense, in the Department of State, are a threat to an operation that requires executive authority. Because, as many of us know, this device is not only found in the United States. This device is monitored, especially given the recent leaks showing the massive amount of Iranian and Pakistani-based botting and Russo-based botting online, especially on social media platforms. There are individuals who are ready to see any kind of a media report which might tip off an attack. For example, when President Joe Biden announced there would be retaliation after his disastrous pullout from Afghanistan, in which 13 U.S. troops were killed in a horrific bombing at Abbey Gate, and Biden vowed to retaliate, sort of. He then announced exactly where he would retaliate 48 hours in advance, which gave time for those that were in the target zone to clear out, and many of them did. Do you know how I know many of them did? Because it wasn't until President Trump's beginning State of the Union style address where it was announced that that individual who was most responsible for the Abbey Gate bombing was now in U.S. custody and was on his way back to the mainland to face justice. The Trump administration, in a situation that was as tense and important as this, could not afford to have leaks going out to every outlet as to exactly what he was going to do. And so, in an effort to combat these leaks, because it's very hard when you have an organization as massive, as monumentally huge as the federal government of the United States, you can't just identify the leaker. And in fact, the old trick of sending out a document to 1,000 people, and they're all 1,000 documents that are just slightly different based on maybe one punctuation or spelling different in each document, and tracking the leaker through that. The Trump administration, again, likely decided to do something different here. And again, given the scope of events over the last week, I would say that is, well, really the last 10 days. Because in the last 10 days is when you started to see this new media strategy from the presidential administration, in which the Trump team would kind of send out a memo and say, this is the president's plan. And someone would leak that to the New York Times. And then the New York Times would report it. And the next day, Trump would get up in front of the country and go, that's really dumb and stupid. Why would anyone trust the New York Times? Terrible. And then the next day, the Trump team would send out another memo that was likely full of crap. And then that one would be leaked to the Washington Post. And the next one would be leaked to the Wall Street Journal. And the next one would be leaked. And so this entire time, no one really had any idea what the Trump administration was going to do. Which, if you recall, back during Trump's first administration, the story that he loves to tell when he came face to face with Vladimir Putin. And Trump said, don't go into Ukraine. Don't do anything else in Crimea. Don't do anything. And he gave Putin this list of things that Putin wasn't going to do. And Trump said, I may bomb the bleep out of you. And Putin said, no, you won't. And Trump said, well, I might. And there's that kind of structured chaos where you do not know what Trump is going to do. In this administration, if everything is leaked 48 hours in advance, then you have a window, 48 hours in advance of what you think the Trump administration is going to do. And especially given the Signal chat expose in which Jeffrey Goldberg from The Atlantic tried to leak information about a Houthi strike hours before it occurred, and then later claimed that things that weren't happening were happening. that the Trump administration, if they just went forward and did their actions, then it would be very likely that someone might have been able to tip off the Iranians and that there might have been some kind of a change that did put U.S. troops at risk before any action was taken, or our allies and partners in the region. So the Trump administration, and not just in media, I'm also receiving word that Vice President J.D. Vance also essentially said today that he didn't believe the United States should be getting involved in Iran at all. That appears to be 100% a ruse. Again, the President of the United States, Donald Trump, has confirmed that he will be speaking in an hour and 15 minutes in front of the country, 10 p.m. Eastern, to address what he is calling one of the greatest military operations in this country's history. The President Trump has also posted a screenshot of open source intel, OSINT 613. He's one of the open source intelligence groups that I follow. A lot of the information is accurate. Some of the information is questionable at times. He's a really good guy. I've met him. He's a solid dude. Sometimes there are rumors posted. Just to be very clear, because I'm trying to keep you guys up to date and be very transparent, President Trump has posted a picture of one of his tweets on his Truth Social in which Open Source Intelligence 613 says, quote, "Fordo is gone," end quote. Again, this Friday, and producer Daniel, I'm really wishing that I would have in fact recorded our phone call that we had Friday evening. But the Washington Free Beacon had reported that Iran had come out after Trump had said there would be a 2-week period in which he would decide sometime throughout that 2 week, again, through a statement given by White House Press Secretary Carolyn Leavitt, he would decide whether or not to strike Iran in the next 2 weeks, and encouraged, advised, implored Iran to come to the negotiating table, and said, again, the one thing that the U.S. will not budge on, Iran may not have any nuclear enrichment whatsoever if they want the war to stop. It's not a negotiation for Iran to have a nuclear program. It was a negotiation to stop the war, to stop the bleeding. And Iran said no. And again, said no pretty overtly. Again, according to Adam Credo over at the Washington Free Beacon, Iran had rejected flatly diplomacy with the United States at all. Says zero enrichment is off the table. And then Trump says, well, fine. Well, then he won't press Israel to stop the airstrikes. And so moving forward, it should be made explicitly clear that that was a huge stinking mistake. As I said that evening, to quote a classic NFL meme, Iran has elected to receive. And boy, did they. Now, the New York Times is now reporting that approximately 30 tons of explosives were used in the strike on the Fordo nuclear facility. Given that the New York Times reporting has gone, what's the right way to put this, aggressively downhill, like National Lampoon's Christmas Vacation, sledding down the snowbank in like a greased saucer downhill, I'm not trusting the New York Times at this moment, unless that explicitly comes from a Department of Defense official. I doubt it. Now, I should point out that whether or not the 30,000 pound munition may be a reference to the GBU 57, A or B, the bunker buster in this particular instance, because it is a 30,000 pound bomb. I've never seen a military report in my life in which any of the media journalists said, this is how many pounds of explosives were used in this strike. I mean, over on the live stream, comments are welcome to correct me if you've ever seen like a report out of the Gulf days, out of the Iraq and Afghanistan days in which we calculated the poundage of munitions used and then sent that over to the New York Times. Very much doubt it. Oh, 30,000 tons, not 1,000 pounds. Sorry. Thanks, producer Daniel. Yeah, I doubt it. Now, again, a 30,000 ton bomb is a very large thing. It requires the B-2 in order to carry it. That's one of the reasons why the United States would have had to be the craft, or would have had to be the supplier of the craft to carry it. And again, Trump is indicating that it's very likely that that it's very, very likely that as much as Iran might have preferred perhaps Israeli strikes continuously, it doesn't even appear, based on comments made by Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu nor Israeli Defense Ministry officials, that was going to be the end game. If the United States had not elected, through President Trump's order, to go through with a targeting of Iranian nuclear infrastructure at Fordo, at Natanz, at Isfahan, that Israel likely would have probably brought in some kind of under air and drone cover commando operation to infiltrate and try to sweep out Fordo. And the reason that I say that is because from the pictures we have of the Fordo bombing in the past, over the last 10 days, the entrance and exits, so to speak, have been left precariously unbombed. Well, now that's definitely not the case. Now, Iranian state-run media is currently claiming that Fordo, Natanz, and Isfahan nuclear facilities had been evacuated prior to tonight's strikes against them by the United States. There's no evidence for that because there was no evidence right now that suggests that Iran had any kind of advance warning as to what was going to happen. The word this morning was that the United States was flying B-2 bombers to Guam and was flying them there via Hawaii. So there was a refueling stop. Fox News had reported this. Several other outlets had reported this. There was a lot of speculation going on that I found rather fishy, but it appears very much to have been a diversion, and the diversion worked. So as far as military execution by the Trump administration, stellar. From an objective standpoint, from what we know about the operation right now, to essentially have the media on their heels so that they didn't know this was coming, to essentially have the Iranians who are claiming they had everything evacuated, but again, there's no evidence to suggest that. So now all the New York Times has to report is that 30,000 tons of munitions were dropped, which again, that might be true. You know, I find suspicious on that personal note. Now, that said, I think that right now, right at this particular point, we don't have any additional information as to whether Iran is preparing any kind of a particular response. We do not, at this moment, have a statement from Israeli government officials. And I'm checking this right now. Correct. At the present time, the last statement from Israel military officials or the Israeli Defense Force in general was about 6 hours ago, and essentially footage of F-14 fighter jets belonging to the ancient Iranian Air Force being struck in central Iran. Oh, in the hangar. Ooh, what a shot. Man, you got to hit a really specific angle for some of those shots. Hitting that 30 degree or that 30 degree angle that close to level, that's a difficult shot. That all said, I am getting additional information right now that, yes, all right, I'm working to confirm this real quick here, excuse me. Give me just a second. I'd rather be very, very, very careful. Yes. Just like when President Trump took out Qasem Soleimani in the first Trump administration, you will recall that the President of the United States tweeted out one thing and one thing very specifically to announce that the strike was successful. That strike was, in fact, an American flag. And the President of the United States 3 minutes ago has just posted a picture of an American flag yet again. So the Trump administration is currently in very high spirits. The president is going to go on air in an hour and 7 minutes. At this point, I don't necessarily have a ton to bring you that isn't analysis and commentary. Therefore, I'm going to ask you kindly that if you appreciated the live coverage, if you would like the video and subscribe. In the description is also a link to the Tony Kinnett cast. I'm not going to drag this on longer than it should be. So again, the United States has struck Iran, per both Iran and President Trump. He will be speaking in 1 hour and 7 minutes, and he will address the country. There's a lot of praise rolling in from the right and a lot of criticism rolling in from the left. No statements from Iran just yet. Fordo, Natanz, and Esfahan have been struck. According to a couple of photos that we're getting in that I just don't have because, again, producer Nick is currently out of state, and producer Daniel, while I love his work and he's being great, he's in North Carolina. So I don't have anyone to load some of the photos for me right now, but just imagine a wall of fire. And that's currently what Fordo looks like. The IAEA is warning that because of the high levels of enriched uranium, which would confirm that if the levels of enriched uranium are that high, if they are warning of the spread of nuclear material, again, not radioactive fallout per se, but they're warning that anytime you strike a nuclear site with a certain level of enriched material, that it explodes. If that is kicked up into the air via dust, then that fissile or radioactive material could be carried along the dust. Now, that said, the 30,000 ton bomb that likely was dropped on Fordo is meant for downward force penetration and not just for wide area of effect gonage. So unless they followed it with a chaser, which, don't get me wrong, the U.S. Air Forces want to do. No one does a chaser quite like a really pissed off F-22 pilot. Nobody. And if that in fact occurs, then yeah, I mean, enjoy the slightly spicy taste of your water for the next couple of days, I suppose, those next to Fordo. But those said, those are the bits of news that we have for you right now. Thanks again for tuning in. Sorry for kind of the hackneyed way this was brought forward. We will see you on the Tony Kinnett cast Monday at 7 p.m. In the morning. Top news in 10. God knows this will be a part of it. And if there's no more live news, I think I'll go back to keeping an eye on this with my family. Thank you very much for tuning in. This is the Tony Kinnett cast on the Daily Signal, nationally syndicated, first out of 93 WIBC. Take care.